The compliment had been nothing more than exhaustion speaking. Warren Keller would later reflect, standing at his orchard's edge with a bowl of something warm and fragrant pressed into his calloused hands by a nervous orc girl who would not meet his eyes. He had been judging apple pies all morning at the Harvest Festival, his tongue coated in sugar and cinnamon until he could barely taste anything, when he had stumbled past the row of savory stalls and caught the scent of something honest and uncomplicated. A beef stew with root vegetables that smelled like his grandmother's kitchen before the drought had turned the valley mean and brittle. The girl tending that stall had been young, perhaps 19 or 20, with green skin that caught the autumn light and small tusks that pressed against her lower lip when she concentrated on ladling portions into wooden bowls. He had stopped, more to rest his aching feet than anything, and when she had offered him a taste with shaking hands, he had accepted out of politeness. The stew had been perfect. Not fancy, not ambitious, just deeply, fundamentally right in the way only food made with absolute attention could be. The beef had been tender, the broth rich without being heavy, the vegetables cooked until they were soft but not mushy, and there had been herbs he could not quite identify that made the whole thing sing. He had swallowed, blinked, and said, "This is the best thing I've tasted all day. You have real skill." Then he had thanked her, returned the bowl, and walked back to the judging table to suffer through another round of dry apple pastries. He had not thought about it again until 3 days later when he found a covered dish on his porch. Warren stood in the pre-dawn cold, staring at the ceramic pot as though it might sprout legs and explain itself. Steam rose from beneath the cloth covering, which meant the food was fresh, which meant someone had walked the 2 miles from the village to his orchard while it was still dark. He looked around, saw nothing but the gray shapes of his trees stretching up the hillside, and carefully lifted the cloth. Chicken soup, thick with barley and carrots, still bubbling hot. A scrap of paper tucked under the pot read in careful, unpracticed letters, "For your kindness." He had not been kind. He had been honest, which was different, but he brought the pot inside and ate the soup for breakfast because his own pantry held only hard cheese, stale bread, and half a jar of last year's apple butter. The soup was as good as the stew had been. Better, maybe. He washed the pot, set it on his porch that evening with a brief note of thanks, and assumed that would be the end of it. The next morning the pot was back, filled with a venison pie that made his mouth water. The morning after that, a bean and bacon casserole. The morning after that, roasted vegetables in a butter sauce with herbs that tasted like spring even though autumn was sliding toward winter. Each dish came with a brief note, the handwriting gradually becoming more confident. "I hope this pleases you. I tried something new today. I remembered you said you liked rosemary." Warren did not recall saying anything about rosemary, but apparently he had complimented that too at some point without realizing it. He began to feel uneasy. Not because the food was unwelcome. It was the only thing standing between him and a winter of thin rations, but because he could not understand what he had done to earn this kind of sustained effort. A compliment was just words. This was work. This was someone spending money on ingredients and hours on preparation, and walking miles in the dark, to deliver something he had not asked for. He resolved to return to the village and find the girl, to thank her properly and tell her she did not need to keep doing this, but the cider press broke that afternoon. Not broke, gave up. The main screw cracked straight through. Would that had been his grandfather's splitting like kindling, and Warren sat in the press house with his head in his hands, doing the arithmetic he had been avoiding all season. The drought had cut his apple yield by half. Half his crop meant half his cider, which meant half his income, which meant he could not afford to replace the press, which meant he could not process the apples he did have, which meant they would rot, which meant no income at all. He could sell the fruit raw, but the market was flooded with farmers making the same desperate calculation. He was going to lose the orchard. His family's orchard, 3 generations of Kellers who had worked this hillside, and he was going to be the one who let it die. The next morning, there was a beef stew on his porch, the same one from the festival. He sat on the cold wooden steps and ate it straight from the pot with the carved spoon that had been tucked inside, and he did not cry, but it was a near thing. He started leaving notes. Real ones, not just thank yous. I have never tasted anything like this. You have a gift. This got me through a hard day. He did not mention the press. He did not mention that he was eating her food for dinner most nights now, stretching it across 2 meals, because he was saving every coin he could scrape together in a futile attempt to afford repairs. He just told her the truth about the food, which was that it was keeping him alive in more ways than one. The dishes kept coming. She began to experiment. A fish chowder that tasted like the coast, though the ocean was 100 miles away. A pork roast with apples that made him laugh because of course she had used apples. He grew apples. She must have bought them from someone who had bought them from him. Bread pudding. Honey cakes. A rabbit stew with mushrooms that was so good he ate the entire pot in one sitting and felt ashamed of himself afterward. He had to find her. He had to understand what this was, what she wanted, why she was doing this. He walked to the village on market day, ignoring the stares of the farmers who knew his orchard was failing, and asked around until someone pointed him toward the small cottage on the edge of town where Elara Voss lived alone. Elara. He had not known her name. He should have asked at the festival, but he had been too tired and too distracted. And now it felt strange to know this detail about someone who had been feeding him for weeks. He knocked on her door just after noon, when the autumn sun was high and weak. She answered quickly, as if she had been near the door, and when she saw him, her green skin flushed darker, her pointed ears twitching. She was smaller than he had remembered, barely reaching his shoulder, with her black hair tied back in a practical braid and flour dusting her hands. "Mr. Keller," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Warren," he corrected automatically. "Please, I wanted to thank you. You have thanked me in the notes." Her tusks caught the light when she spoke, small and somehow endearing. "The notes are not enough." He shifted his weight, aware that he had not thought through what to say. "You have been bringing me food for weeks. I do not understand why." She looked down at her flour-dusted hands. "You said my cooking was good. It is good. It is exceptional, but that does not explain this." No one has ever said that before. Her voice was so quiet he had to lean in to hear. "About anything I have done, my whole life, no one has ever said I was good at something." Warren felt something twist in his chest. "Your parents, dead, since I was 12. I have been working in the kitchens at the inn, washing dishes mostly, and the cook lets me practice sometimes when she is in a good mood, but she has never said I have skill. She has only ever told me what I do wrong, and the people in the village, they do not." She trailed off, but Warren understood. They did not compliment orc girls. They barely spoke to orc girls except to give orders or levy complaints. "So when I said you had skill, you believed me," Warren said slowly. "You had been tasting food all day. Fancy food made by people who have been cooking their whole lives. And you said mine was the best. You were not being polite. You were surprised. I saw your face." She finally looked up at him, her dark eyes fierce. "So yes, I believed you. And you have been cooking for me because of that one compliment." "I have been cooking for you because I want to." Her chin lifted, defensive now. "Because I like cooking for someone who appreciates it. Because I like knowing that you are eating well. If that makes you uncomfortable, I can stop." "No," Warren said, too quickly. He saw her blink, startled. I mean, please do not stop. I have been eating better than I have in years because of you. I just wanted to make sure you knew you did not owe me anything. A compliment is free. You do not have to repay it. I know that. Elara's hands twisted in her apron. This is not repayment. This is. I do not know what this is. But I wake up every morning thinking about what to make for you, and I spend all day cooking, and then I walk to your orchard before dawn because I like imagining you finding it. I like imagining you eating it. I like knowing that something I made matters to someone. Warren had not expected honesty that raw. He stood on her doorstep, this woman he had barely met, but who had been sustaining him for weeks, and tried to find words that would not sound like pity or dismissal. "It matters," he said finally, "more than you know." She studied his face for a long moment, and he had the uncomfortable feeling that she could see past the careful neutrality he had been maintaining, straight through to the desperation underneath. "You are hungry," she said, not a question. "I am managing." "That is not what I asked." He could have lied, should have lied. But she had been feeding him for weeks, walking miles in the dark, spending her wages on ingredients for his meals, and he owed her at least the truth. "The drought hit me hard. I am trying to save the orchard." "Food is not the priority right now." Her expression shifted into something fierce and determined. "Come inside." "I should not intrude." "You are not intruding. I am telling you to come inside." She stepped back, holding the door open, and Warren found himself obeying without quite meaning to. The cottage was small but immaculately kept, with a kitchen that took up most of the single room. The stove was good quality, better than his, and the shelves were lined with jars of herbs and spices, bags of flour and grain, strings of onions and garlic. A pot simmered on the stove, filling the room with the scent of chicken and thyme. She gestured him toward the small table by the window, the only furniture besides the bed in the corner and a single chair by the fire. "Sit," she said. "I was making soup. I did not come here for food. I know." "Sit anyway." She was already ladling soup into a bowl, her movements practiced and efficient. She set it in front of him with a spoon and a thick slice of bread, then stood there with her arms crossed, waiting. Warren picked up the spoon. The soup was perfect, of course. Rich chicken broth, tender meat, vegetables that melted on his tongue, and that same indefinable quality that made all her food taste like home. He ate slowly, aware of her watching, and when the bowl was empty, she refilled it without asking. "When did you last have a full meal?" she asked. "I eat." "When? This morning, your stew. Before that," he tried to remember, "2 days ago, maybe 3. She made a noise low in her throat that sounded almost like a growl. "You are going to make yourself sick. I am trying to save my orchard." "You cannot save anything if you starve to death first." She sat down across from him, her dark eyes fierce. "Tell me what you need." "I do not need anything from you. You have already given me more than I can repay." "I am not asking for repayment. I am asking what you need." Warren set down his spoon. He was not used to this, to someone pushing past his defenses, to someone insisting on helping when he had not asked. But she was looking at him with such intensity, such absolute focus, that he found himself answering. "A new press screw. Or the money to hire someone to repair the old one. Without it, I cannot make cider, and without cider, I cannot make enough to keep the orchard through winter." "How much?" "Too much." "How much, Warren?" he told her. Watched her face carefully for the flicker of dismay or pity, but she just nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I have some savings," she said. "Not enough for that, but some. And I can work more hours at the inn, or take in washing. Or no." He said it more sharply than he meant to. "Absolutely not. I'm not taking your savings." "Why not?" "Because you have already done too much. Because I will not take advantage of your kindness. Because," he stopped, unsure how to explain the tangle of pride and shame and gratitude in his chest. "Because you do not want to owe an orc girl," Elara finished quietly. "That is not what I meant." "Are you sure?" She was not angry, just tired. "Because most people in this village would rather starve than accept help from me. I am used to it." Warren leaned forward, catching her eyes. "I do not care that you are an orc. I care that you barely know me and you have been feeding me for weeks, and now you are offering me your savings. That is too much to accept from anyone, regardless of what they look like." She held his gaze for a long moment, then looked down at her hands. "What if I want to help? Why? Because you were kind to me, because I like cooking for you, because—" She hesitated, her green skin flushing darker. "Because when I imagine you losing your orchard, it makes me feel sick, and I know that is strange. I know we do not really know each other. But that is how I feel." Warren had no answer for that. He sat at her small table in her small kitchen and felt something shift in his chest. Not attraction, exactly, though she was pretty in an unconventional way, with her green skin and dark eyes, and the way her tusks pressed against her lower lip when she was thinking. But something deeper than that. Recognition, maybe. The sense that he had stumbled into something significant without meaning to. "I cannot take your money," he said finally. "But if you want to help, I have a proposition." She looked up, wary but interested. "I have apples, more than I can use because I cannot press them. If you can use them for cooking, you can have them, free. And in exchange, if you want to keep bringing me food, I will accept it, not as charity, as trade." "That is not a fair trade. Apples I can use versus meals every day." "Your meals are worth more than apples," Warren said. "But my pride is worth something too. Let me give you something in return, even if it is not equivalent." Elara considered this, her fingers drumming on the table. "I can make a lot with apples. Pies, tarts, cakes, sauce, butter. I could sell them, save more money. Then we both benefit." She smiled, small and cautious. "All right. Trade." They shook hands across the table, her grip strong and warm, and Warren felt the knot in his chest ease slightly. Not a solution to his problems, but a reprieve. A partnership of sorts. He stood to leave, but she stopped him at the door, pressing a wrapped package into his hands. "Honey cakes," she said, "for later." Warren walked back to his orchard in the fading afternoon light, the package of cakes warm against his chest, and tried to remember the last time someone had cared whether he ate. His parents were dead, his siblings scattered to other provinces, and he had been alone on the hillside for 5 years, managing, getting by, surviving. But Elara Voss, a girl he barely knew, had looked at him and seen hunger, and she had not looked away. That night, he ate honey cakes for dinner and did not feel ashamed. The next morning, he loaded a cart with apples and walked to her cottage. She met him at the door, still in her nightdress with a shawl wrapped around her shoulders, her hair loose and wild. She looked younger like this, softer, and he found himself smiling without meaning to. "I brought your apples," he said. She looked at the cart, piled high with red and gold fruit, and her eyes went wide. "That is too many. Use what you can. The rest will keep in a cool place." "Warren, I cannot trade," he reminded her. "You are feeding me. I am feeding you apples. Fair is fair." She huffed a laugh, shaking her head, but she helped him carry the crates inside. Her cottage had a small root cellar, cool and dark, and they stacked the apples carefully, working in companionable silence. When they were done, she made tea and they sat at her table, watching the sun rise through the window. "I am going to make so many pies," Elara said, her voice full of wonder. "I am going to make pies until I dream about pies. I look forward to tasting them. You will be sick of apples by the time I am done." "Impossible. I have been eating apples my whole life and I am not sick of them yet." She laughed, a bright, unguarded sound that made something warm bloom in his chest. They talked for an hour about nothing important, about the weather and the village and the upcoming frost. Warren realized, somewhere in the middle of a discussion about the best way to store root vegetables, that he was happy. Not content, not resigned, but genuinely happy. It had been a long time. He started finding reasons to visit. Bringing her apples, yes, but also asking her opinion on things he did not really need opinions on. Should he prune the north orchard this year or wait? What did she think about the new miller in the village? Had she heard the rumors about the Baroness visiting in the spring? Elara seemed to understand what he was doing, that he was looking for excuses to sit at her table and drink her tea and listen to her talk about her day. But she never called him on it. She just made tea and talked to him, easy and comfortable, as though they had known each other for years instead of weeks. The food kept coming. She was experimenting now, pushing herself, trying new techniques and flavor combinations. Some things were good, some things were transcendent. A few things were disasters, like the fish pie that had too much salt and the bread that had not risen properly. And Warren ate them anyway, because he could see how much effort she had put in. She started asking for his feedback, really asking, wanting to know what worked and what did not, and he gave her honest answers because that was what she wanted. "The crust is too thick," he said one morning, examining a meat pie. "It overwhelms the filling." "I thought it might be." She made a note in the small book she had started keeping recipes and adjustments scrawled in her careful handwriting. "Thinner next time. The filling is perfect, though. The gravy is rich without being heavy." She flushed, pleased. "I used some of the apple cider you gave me, just a splash." "It adds depth. Clever. I am learning." She looked up at him, her dark eyes bright. "Because of you, you already knew how to cook. I just told you that you were good at it." "That is more than you think." Warren could not argue with that. He had seen the way she carried herself in the village, shoulders hunched, eyes down, trying to take up as little space as possible. But here in her kitchen, she was confident, precise. She moved like a dancer, like someone who knew exactly what she was doing and took pride in it. He liked watching her cook, liked the way her brow furrowed when she was concentrating, the way she tasted things from the spoon and adjusted seasonings with the tiniest pinch of salt or herbs, the way she smiled when something turned out right. He started helping. Not cooking, he was hopeless at that, but chopping vegetables, stirring pots, washing dishes. She protested at first, but he pointed out that it was only fair. She was cooking for him. He could at least clean up. They fell into a rhythm. He would arrive in the morning with apples or firewood, things she needed and he had to spare. She would put him to work on whatever task needed doing. They would cook together, or rather she would cook and he would assist, and then they would eat together at her small table, talking about everything and nothing. The village started to notice. Warren did not care, but Elara tensed whenever someone stared too long at the market or whispered when she walked past. He started walking with her when she went to buy supplies, not hiding exactly, but making it clear that they were together, that she was under his protection. It helped. Not everyone was pleased. There were still stares and mutters, but no one said anything directly, and Elara's shoulders straightened a little more each week. "You do not have to do this," she said one afternoon, as they walked back from the village with bags of flour and sugar. "People are talking." "Let them talk. They are saying we are." She hesitated, her ears twitching. "That we are what, together, courting?" Warren considered this. "Does that bother you? I do not know. Does it bother you?" He thought about it honestly. Did it bother him that people thought he was courting Elara Voss? That people thought he was interested in an orc girl, in this particular orc girl who had been keeping him fed and alive and sane for the past 2 months? "No," he said. "It does not bother me." She looked at him, her expression unreadable. Why not? Because they could do worse than think I have good taste. Elara stopped walking, just stopped in the middle of the road staring at him. Warren Keller, was that a compliment, an observation? It was a compliment. She was grinning now, her tusks catching the light. You think I am pretty? I think you are skilled and kind and interesting and yes, also pretty. Is that so surprising? Yes, she said simply. No one has ever called me pretty before. Warren wanted to say something about the village being full of fools, but he suspected she had heard variations on that theme before, and it had not helped. So instead, he said, well, I am calling you pretty now. You can believe me or not, but I am not in the habit of lying. She searched his face for a long moment, then nodded. I believe you. They walked the rest of the way to her cottage in silence, but it was a comfortable silence, the kind between people who understood each other. When they reached her door, she invited him in for tea, and he accepted, and they sat at her table as the afternoon light faded into evening. I have been thinking, Elara said, her fingers wrapped around her mug, about your orchard. What about it? You said you cannot afford to fix the press. But what if you did not need the press? I need the press to make cider. But what if you did not need to make cider? What if you used the apples for something else? Warren frowned. Like what? Food. Pies, tarts, cakes, preserves. Things that keep, things that sell. I have been selling the pies I make with your apples at the market, and they go fast. People love them. They ask when I am bringing more. You have been selling pies. I told you I was going to make a lot of pies. She smiled. I have made almost enough to pay for the press repairs. Warren stared at her. What? I have been saving. Every coin from every pie. I am almost there. Elara, that money is yours. You earned it. I earned it with your apples, and I want to use it to fix your press. No, why not? Because I am not taking your money, Warren said, frustration creeping into his voice. We have been over this. It is not my money, it is our money, from our apples and my baking. We are partners, are we not? That is what you said, trade. That is not what I meant. Then what did you mean? She leaned forward, her eyes fierce. Because from where I am sitting, we have been working together for months. You give me apples, I make food, we both benefit. But now you are saying I cannot use my part of the benefit to help you. That does not make sense. Warren opened his mouth, closed it. She was right. It did not make sense, not logically. But the thought of accepting that much money from her, money she had earned with her own labor, made his pride sting. I do not want you to sacrifice for me. It is not a sacrifice. It is an investment in our partnership. She reached across the table, her hand covering his. Let me do this, Warren. Please. Let me help. He looked down at her hand, green skin against his weathered tan, and felt something in him give way. Pride was a luxury he could not afford, not when his orchard was at stake. Not when she was offering him a lifeline and all he had to do was swallow his stubbornness and take it. All right, he said quietly, but on one condition. What condition? We make it official. A real partnership. You put in the money for the press. I provide the apples and the labor. We split the profits from the cider 50-50, and we keep working together, baking and selling until we are both secure. Elara's eyes went wide. You want to go into business with me? I want to go into business with you. Why? Because you are good at what you do, because I trust you. Because I like working with you. He hesitated, then added, because I think we could build something together, something that lasts. She was quiet for a long time, her hand still covering his. Then she smiled, slow and wondering. Yes, yes, I would like that. They shook on it, and Warren felt something shift again, something bigger than before. This was not just friendship. This was not just mutual benefit. This was a commitment, a promise, a bet on a future that involved both of them. The press was repaired within the week. The carpenter who did the work was skeptical when Warren explained the arrangement. An orc girl fronting the money for a human man's orchard, but Warren paid him no mind. The screw was installed, the press tested, and by the end of the month, Warren was making cider again. Good cider, the kind his grandfather had taught him to make, with apples from the orchard and techniques passed down through 3 generations. Elara bought barrels of the finished cider and used it in her cooking. Apple cider cakes, cider braised pork, cider vinegar for preserves. She was relentless, inventive, always trying something new. They started selling at the market together, Warren with his cider and Elara with her baked goods, and people came. Not everyone, there were still those who would not buy from an orc, but enough. More than enough. The money started coming in, slow but steady, and Warren began to breathe easier. Winter came, hard and cold, and Warren found himself spending more time at Elara's cottage than his own. It was warmer, for one thing, her stove always going, and for another, she was there. They worked together through the short days, cooking and bottling and planning for spring. She taught him how to make pastry, laughing at his clumsy attempts, and he taught her about pruning and grafting, the secrets of keeping an orchard healthy. They talked about everything. Their childhoods, their losses, their dreams. Warren learned that Elara had been living alone since her parents died, working whatever job she could find, never quite belonging anywhere. He told her about the orchard, about the weight of legacy and the fear of failure, and she listened without judgment. One night, a blizzard hit, and Warren could not make it back to his orchard. Elara insisted he stay, giving him her bed and taking the chair by the fire for herself. He protested, but she was immovable, and eventually he gave in. He lay in her bed, smelling her scent on the blankets, listening to the wind howl outside, and realized he was falling in love with her. It was not a dramatic realization. No lightning bolt, no sudden epiphany. Just a quiet understanding, growing in the spaces between their conversations and the warmth of her kitchen, and the way she smiled when she tasted something she had made, and it was perfect. He was falling in love with Elara Voss, and he had no idea what to do about it. The next morning the storm had passed, leaving the world buried in snow. Warren woke to the smell of bacon and eggs and found Elara at the stove, her hair still mussed from sleep. "Good morning," she said, not looking up. "I thought you might be hungry. I am always hungry when you are cooking." She laughed. "Flatterer." "Truth-teller," he corrected, and she glanced at him, her expression softening. They ate breakfast together, and Warren helped her dig out the path to the road. It took hours, the snow was deep and heavy, but they worked side by side, and when they were done, they were both sweating despite the cold. Elara made tea, and they sat by the fire, warming their hands. "I like this," she said quietly. "Shoveling snow, this, us, working together. It feels right." Warren looked at her, at the way the firelight caught in her dark eyes and painted her green skin gold. "It does feel right. I do not want it to end. It does not have to end." She met his eyes. "What are you saying?" Warren set down his tea, his heart pounding. He was not good with words, had never been, but he owed her honesty. "I am saying that I value our partnership, our friendship, and I am saying that I think it could be more if you wanted it to be." Elara's breath caught. "More. I care about you, Elara. More than I have cared about anyone in a long time. I like waking up and knowing I will see you. I like working with you, talking with you, being with you. And if that is not what you want, I will respect that. But if it is—" He trailed off, unsure how to finish. "It is," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have wanted that for months. I just did not think you felt the same." "Why not?" "Because you are you, and I am me, and people do not usually." She gestured vaguely, frustrated. "People are fools," Warren said. "I am interested in you because of who you are. Because you are talented and kind and strong, and you make me want to be better. Because when I am with you, I feel like I am home. Elara's eyes filled with tears. You cannot just say things like that. Why not? Because it makes me want to cry and kiss you at the same time. You could do both, Warren suggested, and she laughed, watery and bright, and then she was in his arms, her face pressed against his chest. He held her, feeling her shake with laughter or tears or both, and when she pulled back, he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her. It was not a perfect kiss. Her tusks got in the way a little, and they both had to adjust, but it was warm and sweet and right, and when they broke apart, Elara was smiling so wide it looked like it might hurt. "So we are doing this?" she asked. "If you want to." "I want to. I have wanted to since you complimented my stew." Warren laughed. "I had no idea one compliment could lead to all this. You have no idea what your words meant to me, what they still mean." She took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "You saw me, really saw me, and you told me I was good at something. No one had ever done that before. Then everyone else is blind. Maybe, but you were not." She kissed him again, soft and lingering. "I am going to keep cooking for you, you know. I am not going to stop just because we are together now. I am counting on it." They spent the rest of the day together, talking and planning and stealing kisses like teenagers. By the time Warren left for his orchard the next morning, they had decided to formalize their partnership even further. They would combine their operations, turn part of the orchard into a proper kitchen, and sell both cider and baked goods. It would take work and money, but they had both now. They had each other. Spring came slowly, the snow melting in fits and starts, and Warren and Elara threw themselves into their plans. They built a lean-to kitchen on the edge of the orchard, with a good stove and plenty of workspace. Elara moved most of her supplies there, and they started working in earnest. She baked pies and tarts and cakes while he pressed cider and tended the trees, and in the evenings, they cooked together and ate together and talked about the future. The village had definitely noticed by now. Warren and Elara were together, not hiding it, and the reactions were mixed. Some people were supportive or at least neutral. Others were less kind. Warren overheard comments at the market, saw the way some people refused to buy from them, and he felt his temper flare. But Elara stopped him, her hand on his arm. "It does not matter," she said. "It does matter. They are being cruel. They are being predictable. Let them talk. We have customers. We have each other. That is enough." She was right, but it still made him angry. He started making a point of being affectionate in public, holding her hand, kissing her cheek, making it clear that he was proud to be with her. Some people got the message. Others did not. Warren stopped caring which, one afternoon in early spring, a well-dressed man approached their market stall. He was older, perhaps 50, with the kind of clothes that suggested money and the kind of manner that suggested he was used to getting his way. "You are Warren Keller?" the man asked. "I am. I am Harold Moss from the capital. I have heard about your operation here. The cider and the baked goods. I am interested in purchasing in bulk." Warren blinked. "In bulk? For my stores. I own several shops in the capital and the surrounding towns. I am always looking for quality products, and I have heard yours are exceptional." Warren glanced at Elara, who looked as surprised as he felt. "We are a small operation. I do not know if we can supply the volume you are looking for. Start small. A few barrels of cider, a few dozen pies. Let me test the market. If it sells well, and I expect it will, we can discuss increasing the order." They negotiated terms, and by the end of the conversation, Warren and Elara had their first major contract. It was not a fortune, but it was steady money, and it was validation. Someone in the capital thought their work was good enough to sell. Lara was radiant. "We did it," she said as soon as Harold Moss was out of earshot. "We actually did it." "You did it," Warren corrected. "Your cooking is what sold him. Our cooking, our cider, ours. She grabbed his hands, grinning. We are going to be all right, Warren. We are going to make it. He pulled her into a kiss, not caring who saw, and she laughed against his mouth, bright and joyous. They worked harder than ever to fill the order. Elara baked until her hands were sore, and Warren pressed cider until his shoulders ached, but they did it. They delivered the goods on time, and 2 weeks later, Harold Moss sent word that he wanted to double the order, then triple it. Within 3 months, they were supplying half a dozen shops, and the money was rolling in. Warren paid off the last of his debts and started making improvements to the orchard. New trees, better tools, a second press. Elara bought more supplies, experimented with new recipes, and hired a girl from the village to help with the baking. They were thriving, but more than that, they were happy. Warren had never been happier, working beside Elara every day, falling into bed exhausted every night, waking up to the smell of whatever she was baking for breakfast. She moved into the orchard house with him in the summer, and they turned her old cottage into a storage space for supplies. It felt right, the two of them under one roof, building a life together. One evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Elara said, "I have been thinking." "About what?" "About what comes next. We have the orchard, we have the business, we have each other, but I want more." Warren's heart skipped. "What do you want?" "I want to make it official, not just the business. Us." He turned to look at her and she was blushing, her green skin dark in the fading light. "Are you asking me to marry you, Elara Voss?" "I might be, if you are interested." He laughed, the sound surprising him. "I am very interested." "Good." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small wooden ring, simple and smooth. "I made this." "Well, I did not make it. I asked Thomas the carpenter to make it, but I designed it. I know it is not fancy, but I wanted to give you something." Warren took the ring, his throat tight. "It is perfect." "So, is that a yes?" "That is a yes." He slipped the ring onto his finger, then pulled her into his arms. "I love you, Elara. I have loved you for a long time." "I love you too," she whispered. "Since the stew. Since you told me I had skill and I believed you. Best compliment I ever gave. Best stew I ever made." They were married in the autumn, a small ceremony in the orchard with a handful of friends and neighbors who had come to accept them. Elara wore a simple green dress that matched her skin, and Warren wore his best clothes, and they stood under the apple trees and promised to love and support each other for the rest of their lives. The priest stumbled over the vows a little. He had never married a human and an orc before, but he got through it. And when Warren kissed his wife, there was a smattering of applause. They held the reception in the new kitchen, with tables laden with food that Elara had spent days preparing. Pies and roasts and stews and cakes, everything she made best, and people ate until they were stuffed, and then ate some more. Warren watched her move through the crowd, accepting compliments with a grace she had not had a year ago, and he felt a surge of pride so strong it nearly knocked him over. "You did good, Keller," Thomas the carpenter said, clapping him on the shoulder. "She is a fine woman." "I know," Warren said. "Heard you two are planning to expand, build a proper tavern or some such." "Maybe. We have been talking about it." It was true. They had been discussing the idea for months, turning their operation into a roadside tavern where travelers could stop for food and drink. It would be a big undertaking, but they had the resources now, and the reputation. "Well, if you need help with the building, let me know. I owe you for the cider you gave me last winter." Warren thanked him, and they talked for a while longer, and then Elara was at his side, her hand slipping into his. "Having a good time?" she asked. "The best." "Me too." She leaned against him, tired but content. "Thank you." "For what?" "For seeing me, for believing in me, for loving me." "Thank you for feeding me," Warren said, and she laughed, the sound bright and free. They stayed at the reception until late, and then they walked back to the house together, hand in hand. The orchard was quiet, the trees dark shapes against the stars, and Warren thought about how much had changed in a single year. How one compliment, one honest word had led to all of this. A partnership, a business, a marriage, a life. "What are you thinking about?" Elara asked. "About how lucky I am." "We are lucky," she corrected. "Both of us." "Both of us," he agreed. They reached the house, and Elara pulled him inside, her hands already working at the buttons of his shirt. They made love slowly, tenderly, and afterward they lay tangled together in the darkness, listening to the wind in the trees. "I want to build the tavern," Elara said, her voice soft. "I want to cook for people every day, make them happy, make them feel welcome, and I want to do it with you." "Then we will build it," Warren said, "together." She kissed him, and he tasted salt and sweetness, tears and joy, and he thought that this right here was everything he had ever wanted. Not the orchard, not the business, though those mattered, but this, her, them. Winter came and went, and in the spring they broke ground on the tavern. It was a massive project, but they had help. Thomas the carpenter and his crew, neighbors who owed them favors or just wanted to be part of something new, and even Harold Moss sent a donation, saying he wanted to invest in their success. The building went up slowly, a sturdy structure of wood and stone with a large kitchen and a dining room that could seat 30. Elara designed the menu, everything she had perfected over the past year plus new dishes she had been dreaming about. Warren built a second cider press, larger than the first, and installed it in a shed behind the tavern. They worked from dawn to dusk, and some days it felt like the project would never end, but eventually it did. The tavern opened in late summer, just before harvest season. They called it the Orchard's Rest, and they hung a sign above the door with an apple tree painted on it. The first night was chaotic. They were not quite ready. The kitchen was not fully stocked, and Warren had to run back to the house twice for supplies, but people came. Travelers, neighbors, even some folks from the capital who had heard about Elara's cooking and wanted to try it for themselves. Elara was in her element. She moved through the kitchen like a force of nature, directing her assistant, tasting sauces, plating dishes with an artist's precision. Warren worked the front, serving cider and talking to customers, and every time he glanced back at the kitchen and saw Elara in her apron, her face flushed with heat and effort and joy, he fell in love with her all over again. By the end of the first week, they were fully booked every night. By the end of the first month, they had to turn people away. The tavern was a success, more than they had dared to hope, and it was all because of Elara's cooking. People came from miles around to taste her pies, her stews, her roasts. They raved about the food, left generous tips, and told their friends. Warren watched his wife thrive, and he marveled at how far they had come. From a single compliment at a harvest festival to this, a thriving business, a full life, a partnership that had become a marriage and then something even bigger. She had been cooking for him like a woman possessed for over a year now, and she showed no signs of stopping. One night after the tavern had closed and they were cleaning up, Elara said, "I think I might be pregnant." Warren dropped the mug he was holding. It hit the floor with a clatter but did not break. "What? I am late, and I have been feeling strange, tired but in a different way. And this morning I could not stand the smell of bacon, which has never happened before." He crossed to her in 3 strides, taking her hands. "Are you sure?" "Not yet, but I think so." She looked up at him, her eyes bright with hope and fear. "Would that be all right?" "I know we have not talked about children, and the tavern is still so new, and it would be more than all right," Warren said, his voice rough. "It would be perfect." Elara's face crumpled and she started to cry, and Warren held her while she sobbed into his shirt. Happy tears, he thought. Or at least he hoped. "I am scared," she admitted, her voice muffled. Me too. But we will figure it out, we always do. She pulled back, wiping her eyes. You really think we can do this, run a tavern and raise a child? I think we can do anything as long as we do it together. She smiled, watery but genuine. You are such a sap, Warren Keller. You married me anyway. I did. She kissed him, soft and sweet. I really did. Elara was pregnant. The midwife confirmed it a week later, and they spent the next few months preparing. They hired more help for the tavern. A cook to assist Elara and a server to help Warren, so that Elara could rest when she needed to. She hated resting, wanted to keep working, but Warren was firm. The baby was more important than the business. Their daughter was born in early spring, a tiny thing with green skin and her father's eyes and a set of lungs that could wake the dead. They named her Sylvie, and she was perfect. Elara cried when she held her for the first time, and Warren cried too, though he would deny it later. The tavern adjusted. Sylvie spent her first months in a cradle near the kitchen, sleeping through the noise and chaos, and as she grew, she became part of the operation. Customers loved her, cooing over her green skin and tiny tusks, and Warren loved watching Elara with her, the fierce protectiveness and overwhelming tenderness. Years passed. The tavern prospered. They expanded, adding more rooms for travelers, a second dining area, a larger kitchen. Warren hired more staff, and Elara trained them, passing on her skills and her passion. Sylvie grew into a bright, curious child who loved helping in the kitchen, standing on a stool to stir pots and taste sauces. Warren and Elara grew older, grayer, but no less devoted. They worked side by side every day, and every night they fell into bed exhausted and content. The orchard thrived, the tavern thrived, and they thrived. One evening, when Sylvie was 5 and Warren was teaching her to prune apple trees, Elara called them in for dinner. They washed up and sat at the big table in the kitchen, the one they had built when the tavern opened, and Elara served them a stew. The same stew she had made at the harvest festival all those years ago. Warren took a bite, and the taste brought back a flood of memories. The festival, the exhaustion, the moment he had complimented her and changed both their lives. He looked at Elara, and she was watching him, a small smile on her face. "This is the best thing I have tasted all day," he said, echoing those first words. "Flatterer," she replied, but her eyes were soft. "Truth-teller," he corrected, and she laughed. Sylvie looked between them, confused. "What are you talking about?" "I will tell you when you are older," Elara said. "It is a long story." "Is it a good story?" "The best," Warren said. "It is the story of how I met your mother." Because of stew," Elara confirmed. Sylvie frowned. "That is a weird way to meet someone." "Maybe," Warren said, "but it worked out all right." He reached across the table and took Elara's hand, and she squeezed his fingers, and they smiled at each other. Two people who had built a life out of apples and compliments, and the simple, powerful act of feeding someone you cared about. The tavern was full that night, as it was most nights, and Warren and Elara worked together, moving through the familiar rhythms they had perfected over the years. Sylvie helped where she could, carrying plates and refilling mugs, and Warren felt a swell of gratitude so strong it took his breath away. This was his life, his family, his legacy. Not just the orchard, though that mattered. Not just the tavern, though that mattered too. But this. The three of them, working together, building something that would last. When the last customer left and the tavern was clean, they walked back to the house together, Sylvie between them, holding both their hands. The orchard was quiet, the trees whispering in the breeze, and Warren looked up at the stars and thought about how far they had come. "I love you," he said to Elara, not for the first time and not for the last. "I love you too," she replied. "Thank you for the compliment," he laughed. "Thank you for the stew," Sylvie tugged on his hand. "You two are weird." "Maybe," Elara said, "but we are happy." "Are we always going to be happy?" Sylvie asked. Warren and Elara exchanged a glance. They both knew that life was not that simple, that there would be hard times ahead, losses and struggles and sorrows. But they also knew that they would face them together, the way they had faced everything else. "We will try," Warren said. "That is all anyone can do." Sylvie seemed satisfied with that answer, and they walked the rest of the way in comfortable silence. When they reached the house, Elara put Sylvie to bed, and Warren stood on the porch, looking out at the orchard he had nearly lost, and the tavern they had built and the life they had made. Elara joined him a few minutes later, slipping her arm around his waist. "What are you thinking about?" "About how lucky I am. We are. Still thinking about that after all these years. Every day." She rested her head on his shoulder. "Me too." They stood there for a long time, watching the moon rise over the orchard, and Warren thought about the first time he had tasted Elara's stew, the exhaustion and the honesty and the simple words that had started everything. "I have never tasted anything like this. You have real skill." He had meant it then, and he meant it now. Elara Vos Keller had real skill, not just in cooking but in loving, in building, in making a life out of scraps and determination. And he was grateful every single day that he had been too tired to lie, too honest to keep his compliment to himself. Because that compliment had given him everything: a partner, a wife, a family, a future, and he would spend the rest of his life being worthy of it. Inside the house, Sylvie was already asleep, dreaming whatever dreams 5-year-olds dreamed. In the kitchen, there were dishes to wash and plans to make for tomorrow's meals. In the orchard, the trees were heavy with fruit, waiting for the harvest. And in the tavern, there would be customers tomorrow, hungry and tired, looking for a good meal and a warm welcome. Warren and Elara would give it to them, together, the way they did everything. He turned to his wife and she turned to him, and they kissed under the stars, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely way and built something beautiful out of it. "Come on," Elara said, taking his hand. "Let us go to bed. We have a long day tomorrow. We always have a long day tomorrow. And we always get through it." They walked inside, closing the door behind them, and Warren thought that, yes, they always got through it, because they had each other. Because they had love. Because they had started with a compliment and a bowl of stew, and they had turned it into everything. And that, Warren thought as he climbed into bed beside his wife and pulled her close, was more than enough. It was everything. The orchard would keep growing. The tavern would keep thriving. Sylvie would keep learning and exploring and becoming whoever she was meant to be. And Warren and Elara would keep working side by side, day after day, year after year, building the life they had chosen. A life that had started with 5 simple words: "This is the best thing I have tasted all day," and it had been the best thing. The start of everything. Warren closed his eyes, Elara warm and solid beside him, and he smiled. Yes, he thought, the best thing. And he fell asleep, content and grateful, knowing that tomorrow would bring more of the same. More work, more love, more life, together, always together.